Who doesn't love pasta? Whenever I think about pasta, Bolognese is one of the first ones that comes to mind. Today, I'm going to show you how to make a restaurant-style Bolognese sauce. And sorry to all my Italian friends, it might not be the most traditional Bolognese, but it sure is going to be delicious. So tag along and let's get cooking. For this recipe, we'll be using two types of meat, pork shoulder and chuck flat. In this case, we'll be using 1 pound of. I personally like using chuck flats because it has a lot of fat. I'll be grinding my own today, but you can definitely go to your butcher shop and get some ground pork shoulder and ground chuck flat. The first step to grinding your own meat is to cut it into small enough pieces so they go down the chute. You don't want to be pushing your meat down the chute. Then we're going to place it in the freezer because it's going to make the grinding process easier. Now on to our veggies. For this recipe, we'll be using 5 small carrots or 2 medium carrots and 1 whole onion. We'll start by cutting our onion in half and taking the skin off. After our onions have been peeled, we want to cut them into small dice. We'll start by making a couple horizontal cuts on both onions, and we'll follow that by some vertical cuts. That will leave us with long strips of onion, which we'll then cut and will yield us some beautiful diced onion. Like this one right here. You want to cut all of your onion into even pieces. For our carrots, we'll be taking the top off, then cutting the carrots into half or manageable pieces. Then we'll take a couple slices to create a base so our carrot doesn't slide around while we try to cut it. Once we have our sliced carrots, we'll start stacking them and then cutting strips. And it's basically the same idea as the onion, where then we cut against it and we end up with small dice. Now you could definitely throw big chunks of vegetables into your sauce to add flavor and take them out at the end of the cooking process. But I personally like putting small diced vegetables in my sauce so they become part of the sauce as they cook. And voila! You got small diced carrots and onions. It's time to grind our meat. There's not much I can tell you about grinding meat because chances are, if you are grinding your own meat and you own a grinder, you definitely know how to use that grinder. The one thing I will say is part of the reason why I like grinding my own meat is because I know exactly what I'm getting, but also because I can grind my meat different sizes depending on what I'm doing. In this case, I'll be grinding my beef chuck flat through the coarse plate of the grinder, and then I'll grind the pork with the medium grind plate. I feel like this makes for a much better texture contrast in the finished sauce. If you're grinding your own meat and you desire to change the plate, go for it, until all the beef and pork has been ground. Let's check out the difference in grind size. Pretty cool, huh? Now it's time to start cooking our sauce. In an oven-proof pot set over medium-high heat, we want to add 2 to 3 tablespoons of olive oil. Once that oil gets dripping, we'll start adding our meat. We'll start by adding our ground pork, and you can sure add it all at once. I know you've heard that you can't overcrowd your pan or it won't sear properly, but in this case, we are going to render some of that fat, and as the liquid evaporates, your meat will start browning. You'll want to make sure you stir your meat while it cooks so it browns evenly. So every couple minutes, give it a little stir. After about 10 minutes of cooking, your meat will be nice and golden brown like that. Try to scrape as much of that brown deliciousness off the pot as you can. Let our ground pork is brown, we'll transfer it to a different plate or a tray so we can get our beef in there. And we'll do the exact same procedure. We'll wait for our pot to be nice and hot. We'll add a couple tablespoons of olive oil and we'll add our beef in. You want to make sure that pot is ripping hot before you add your meat so it starts searing right away. You also want to make sure you keep a consistent medium to high heat throughout the browning process. And just like we did with our pork, you want to make sure you stir that beef as it browns. And this, my friends, is what victory sounds like in the world of meat browning. Once our meat is brown and ready to go, we'll place it right beside our pork. And again, try to scrape as much as you can off the bottom of the pan. Don't stress if there's a little bit behind. Once we add our vegetables, the liquid of the vegetables will deglaze our pan. We'll put our pot back onto medium-high heat. We'll add a little bit more olive oil, then we'll add all of our vegetables in at once. And same drill, only this time, you're not looking for color. You just want to sweat your vegetables out a little bit. After about 5 minutes, we'll deglaze our pot with half a cup of red wine. Stir it, make sure you scrape the bottom of that pot very well to get all those brown bits, and we'll season with a little bit of salt. Keep stirring, you want that liquid to reduce right down. You want the bottom of your pot to look fairly dry, like this. This is a sign that the vegetables have absorbed some of that wine, and it also has reduced, concentrating that flavor. We'll add all of our pre-browned meat back into the pot. Once it's all in the pot, we'll be adding 32 ounces of whole tomatoes. You can definitely use crushed tomatoes, diced tomatoes. Just make sure there's some really good quality Italian tomatoes. Don't stress out about the size of the tomatoes, as they will break down during the cooking process. Now I want you to be honest with me. How many times have you bought Parmesan cheese only to use the middle of it because the rind is too hard? Well, let me tell you, you're going to take that rind and you're going to start throwing it into your stews, into your soups, and it's going to take them to a whole new level. After that, you want to pop that bad boy in a 350-degree oven. Now your sauce is going to take about 2 to 3 hours to cook. So in the meantime, I'm going to show you how to make a killer chili oil. In a small pot, add 1/4 cup of canola oil, 1/4 cup of olive oil. You also want to add 1 bay leaf, a couple garlic cloves, make that 4 if you may, and 1 tablespoon of chili flakes. If you want a little bit more spicy, add more chili flakes. Turn that bad boy into a low heat and let it go for about an hour while your sauce cooks. After about an hour of steeping, you want to strain it, and voila, you get some delicious homemade chili oil. You might be wondering why we didn't put a lid on this pot. The reason being is we want a little bit of that browning on top. That browning is a little bit bitter, which is going to balance out the sourness and sweetness from the tomato and make a very well-rounded sauce. And all that's left to do is take out the parm rind. It is quite chewy, so you don't want to be eating it. And then we'll be seasoning your sauce with salt and cracked black pepper. Stir your sauce and make sure all those brown bits that were floating on top are scattered throughout your sauce. And in case you used whole tomatoes, you want to stir this sauce vigorously so you break up those tomatoes and they become part of the sauce instead of chunks of tomatoes everywhere. Now at this point, you can either use your sauce right away, or you can store it in the fridge for a few days or the freezer for a couple weeks. Now you can definitely use some boxed pasta, but you've gone through all the trouble, it's taken about 3 hours, might as well use some fresh pasta. Hit the link in the description below to find out how I make my pasta. This pasta dish will be using fresh noodles, our bolognese sauce, some fresh basil, butter and salt. Transfer your cooked noodles into a clean pot. Please try to not spill your noodles everywhere like I did there. Anyway, to your cooked noodles, you're going to add about 7 ounces of your cooked bolognese. To that, you're going to add a healthy knob of butter. Don't be shy on the butter. Then we'll add some torn basil. I personally like to tear my basil right into my sauce so it blends in with the sauce instead of topping it. I'll also be adding a couple tablespoons of our pasta cooking liquid. This bolognese is a quite thick sauce, so you want to loosen it up a little bit with butter and water. That butter and water are also going to create an emulsion and are going to make for an extra creamy bolognese finished pasta. Season your pasta with salt, and now it's time to plate it. You don't have to use fancy tweezers and twirl it up like I am, but again, you've gone through a lot of trouble, might as well do it proper. Twirl your pasta and transfer it onto a plate. Then we're going to take some of that sauce that's left on the bottom and top our pasta with it. We don't want to leave that delicious sauce that we've worked so hard for behind, do we? And now, my favorite part. Make it rain, baby! Also be drizzling some of that fantastic chili oil we made while we waited for our sauce to cook.
And there you have it, a bolognese that even your nonna would approve of. Comment below what you think I should make next, like this video, subscribe, and I'll see you guys soon. Thanks for watching.